Hello everyone, welcome back. This video is going to be the technical analysis for the Diamond Color EQ. That's the name that usually has. This is version 3. However, it's going to apply to future versions as well because they get improved, but the tone or the qualities, the features that the EQ was designed for are going to remain constant. So the interface is pretty simple. There is the Studio DMI logo, which acts as a bypass. And there's a few controls that are very typical of an EQ. So each of the 4 band can be bypassed individually. And you see there's just an ever so slight change in the frequency response. So these bands are, as you would expect from a more analog type of behavior, not exactly transparent, but they're super close to being the probably stereotype of a mastering equalizer, right? But right now our gains are all at 0, which is reported by the big knobs on top. We've got low frequencies, we got low medium frequencies, high medium frequencies, and high frequencies. So it's 4 bands. But we're gonna see they're kind of different and they all play a little bit of a different game, which makes these EQ really cool. At the full left, there's presets and there's an input knob which acts, as you would expect, as a normal input gain. So this actually reflects not just the amount of level and harmonics that might get influenced into it if we're gonna have the preamp on, but actually just pure volume. So this is reported by the 0, 6, 12, 18, and we have a minus or plus 24 difference that we can create. The other side, the right side, has an output gain knob, which again, as you would expect, generates an output gain difference. So this is sort of a makeup. Below these 2 knobs are filters. So there's a high pass, an HP, and a low pass. Left is the HP and right is the low P. So the off position is naturally completely off. So this is more of a digital situation in which you might want to have no difference at all the way down to 0 hertz, which obviously could not apply in the analog domain, but most plugins do when you want to completely remove the high pass circuit. We can then step up to the 3 different positions that this plugin has. It's 25 hertz, 33 hertz, and 40 hertz. So they're a little bit different, and they probably model different type of filters that Luca from Studio DMI liked to use in different situations. This one, for example, the 40 hertz, has a little bit of a 200 hertz bump, which probably makes it more appealing and interesting. But that's probably the reason why I kind of like to engage in on lead vocals and things like that. There's a little bit of an upper telephone frequency presence. So we're going to bring it back to off, and we're going to take a look at the low pass. The low pass is different in regard of not being stepped, but I can roll my mouse wheel and we can see how we are slowly introducing the behavior of an analog equalizer that has a 24 kilohertz low pass and then has a 20, and then we're going down to the 17. So it's a very slight change, but what makes this interesting is that, as you can see, we have sort of an actual high pass, because once we engage this feature, we're also introducing a realm of more of an analog equalizer, a machine that, as we said, would have some kind of high pass, because in the analog domain, you cannot avoid high passing because then you have DC issues, right? So the moment you're instantiating a low pass and you're bringing that up to, I would say, a realistic 24, you're actually bringing in a high pass filter as well, which is not as effective as a 25. We can scale these down to see it. For example, that we are sloping down. This is more of a shelf. You see, we're here at minus 46.5, around minus 50 dBs. We're shelving back to some sort of a more linear behavior. This is because shelves are known to be a little bit more forgiving in terms of phase response. So this is probably why they wanted to do this. If I bring these high pass to off and I start introducing the low pass, we see that we're approaching kind of a similar behavior, but this is way, way low. We're down to the 12 hertz or 13 sloping down to the 16 hertz. This to me looks very typical of an analog equalizer. So you could still keep it at off, but engage the low pass, and you should know that there's gonna be some very mild high passing at sort of a DC conceived level, right? But the difference is also in the fact that the low pass is not stepped. So we can actually design it in terms of very precise adjustments, which is really nice. So this concludes everything for the two filters. We can now move to the bands themselves. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bypass all of them, minus the first one in this case, and I'm gonna scale back to a more forgiving 9 dBs to +3 and up to a -16. This is gonna allow us to see the bells a little bit better. So we have 20, 40, and 60, but these are not stepped. So by the moment, as soon as I instantiate this low frequency gain bump, which we're gonna keep at around 4, I can actually shift around in a continuous mode. And you see that there's differences here. The 60 hertz is a little bit more sort of forgiving in how much it hugs the frequencies. And when I lean back to the 20, our Q factor or definition of our bell is actually a little bit more into the tightened situation, right? It has a tighter behavior. So this would be how the bell looks in its positive mode, and then you can see how it affects the whole spectrum when I'm going to the minus side. But this is pretty much a bell-like behavior for the lows. When I move to the low mids, I have 80 to 120. So by the moment I instantiate some gain change, like a plus something, it would be probably around a +4, looks kind of like. I can move these around and you see that the gain change is actually moving. So all of these technical analysis is really nice to do, but it also reinforces the concept that you go by ear. But it's nice to know that the lower we go, the different these behaviors are, the higher we go, the more the cues open. It's a morphing situation between frequency areas and probably EQ bands of different pieces of gear that are being brought together into this sort of an idealized EQ. The same goes for when we go to the minus side. We have kind of maybe a different cue. I would say no, it's probably the same. Okay, that's interesting to know. Then there's the high medium frequencies. The high mids are really, really good and really creative and have a ton of color to them, because these are combinations of bell, of peaks. So by the time I move something like our +4-ish, let's say gain change, you can see that the labeling is a little bit different. We've got 870-6.4K, and this is exactly what it means. It's two different bells interacting together. Then I have a stepped knob that brings me straight away to 620 hertz and 8 kilohertz. You see the two bells are now a little bit farther apart. And the third stage brings these two bells even farther apart. So they look to me as if these are two bells. I don't think it's shelves with filters, but anyway, what matters is that we have this sort of like a flat hill, right? Opening up and changing in gain ever so slightly here. You see there's also a little bit of an increment by the time we're getting into the drastic moves, like +9. The two peaks are a little bit more resonant than what we had here. Same goes for the minus. There's obviously this change around 200 hertz for the last one. It's not exactly 100% linear. This is what the analog pieces of gear that they brought together, interacted to generate. So this we'll see it in the practical examples is probably the real color of the unit, because the way Luca and Studio DMI and Acoustic Audio chose these 2 point of intervention really gives any track a clear, straight sounding approach. There's a tone to it that definitely brings a track to speak more in a certain direction. We'll see that. For the high frequencies, we have 15K to 50. So by the time I instantiate some gain and I bring these up, I'm now probably using a bell, but a very wide one. And that makes sense to say, why do I have, even if my filters are off, something like 50K, which is still getting, filtered at Nyquist. Well, this is because ideally the center point of this peak would be 50 kilohertz, but obviously we're way past our Nyquist frequency, which even if we're here at 96K, it's obviously around the 48 mark, right? So it's an idealized way of saying that we are striving to increase the center point of 50 kilohertz, which is gonna make our peak frequency a little bit different and around the Nyquist. It sounds really nice. It opens things up in a very, very nice way. And you see, by the moment I instantiate the high frequency, I am back into having the high pass behavior. So this will also mutate by the time I start using the low pass. But this is a very organic kind of change, kind of interaction between filters and bands. It's like a morphing factor between different, as I said, pieces of gear that bring different things to the table. Last but not least, something that a lot of people probably, I also do, like consider first, is the preamp function. But I kept it last because I want to show you what happens when I go preamp on, which is this button here. I turn it on and we have a pivot point, which is still around -9, but you see how things get a little bit changed. We have an EQ type of intervention right off the bat. So we have almost +3, I would say it's a +2 and change at around 10 kilohertz. So we're opening things up and we are a little bit into a deep move for the presence, the clear, sheer 1000 hertz, right? The cheap way of adding presence to something. This has a drastic effect visually here. What we're seeing, like, wow, this is by all means not flat, but I guarantee you that once you instantiate this, it's kind of addictive because it brings things to a higher level of definition. This also adds harmonics, and now we can see that. This is a 1000 hertz, 1 kilohertz sine wave, the fundamental in green that you see in the center. Once I disable the preamplifier, I no longer have harmonics. So this would be a fairly clean, actually 100% clean equalizer with no harmonics, sort of a digital, idea of it. But by the time I instantiate the preamplifier, I start having, harmonics of first order, second order, third order harmonics. I usually like to engage the preamp right away. If I think I want to use the color EQ, the diamond EQ, it probably means to me that I want the preamp. That's the first thing I want to instantiate. But it's really good that we can obviously disable it. We can use this EQ in left, right, in mid mode, so only the mids are affected, or side mode. So if we chain two of these together, we get a mid-side processing factor in which we can change the mid or the side or both of them. The last button that is really, really good to use and very useful is the dB 3 times. So if I disable the preamplifier and suppose I have just one band pushing this much into the high mids, it's something that I like, and I think or I know that I tend to overdo my moves just because I'm pushing some kind of sound design approach into the tracks, I can, once I'm done, engage the dB 3 times, which means actually the opposite. Once it's on, things need to be done by 3 times to get the same effect. So you see how we scaled it down and now we have a much more tame behavior. So suppose you're doing your moves, you like a lot of 60 hertz and this track sounds unbelievably nice. You dip a little bit of 100 and then you add some 50, for example. This is a lot. And then you want to bring it back into context and you just do a milder kind of change and you have sort of a softer instant behavior. You can use it the other way around, but I usually either like to dial it in right off because I'm doing maybe mastering moves where I want to be very subtle, or I like to kind of design it in a way. So I push things to a sort of an instinctual level and then I back it off, and it instantly gives me a perspective of, would it sound better if I just do an in-between kind of move or split the difference? So, very last function that we will probably see here, but very, very useful. And this concludes our technical analysis on the Diamond Color EQ.